Merry Christmas, everybody, and as my last video before Christmas arrives, I knew I just had to do something about Santa Claus. Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Now, Santa Claus is Coming to Town came out in 1970 and is another stop-motion animated Rankin special. It may be the most famous of all of them aside from Rudolph. And watching this one again, I can see why. There is so much charm and likability and personality thrown into these little puppets. That even as a grown adult, when I put it on and watch it, I'm transported back to the days of my youth when we would watch these on VHS tape. And the world was just a simpler place back then. And this special takes an interesting approach to the formula of, oh, let's have a very famous holiday song and we'll just make a story out of it. They did it with Rudolph, they did it with Frosty, they did it with Little Drummer Boy, and now they're doing it with Santa Claus is Coming to Town. But there's really not much of a story. It's just Santa's coming and you guys better be good. But in keeping with the seemingly never-ending creativity of Rankin and Bass, they pulled from this song the origin story of Santa Claus. And I should say, if you're expecting the historical story of St. Nicholas, this really isn't that. This is a complete world-building mythological interpretation of what could be the origin story of Santa Claus, and it's told through a really creative way. And every time I watch it, I forget about this framing device, and I don't know why I forget. It's famous, it's all over the posters and stuff, and it's Fred Astaire, you know, probably the greatest ballroom dancer, just probably dancer in general, of all time in animated puppet form, which kind of feels weird because he's known so much for his physicality, and to have him not actually be there is a little odd, but that's really besides the point. He's a mailman and he's delivering letters to Santa up to the North Pole so that Santa can read them and know what to make the kids. But when he starts reading these kids' letters, they ask all these questions about who is Santa Claus? Why do they call him Kris Kringle? Why does he wear the red suit? Why does he have whiskers? Why does he put presents in stockings? All these questions I'm sure every kid has either asked or wanted to ask about the myth of Santa Claus since probably the whole story started. And it's in an attempt to answer all these questions where S.D. Kluger, yeah, that's his name, it's weird. He weaves this 50-minute narrative of who Santa Claus was as a young man and how he got into the toy delivery business in the first place. And it's here where we spend the vast majority of the runtime, and it's a pretty entertaining ride, actually getting to see all the different influences and things that Kris Kringle as a young man had to do and deal with that inadvertently started all of these Christmas traditions. And Kris Kringle in this version is not played by the same voice actor that played him in Rudolph. Instead, here he's played by Mickey Rooney, which I never thought would be a perfect choice for Santa Claus in voice form, but he really delivers on that. And I don't think Mickey Rooney gets enough credit as a voice actor. Sure, he's been in tons of movies, especially way back in the day, and he's a household name. People know him. Or if you're in my generation or a little younger, you just know him as the short guy from The Night at the Museum. But he really does have a talent for voice work, and it shows in this movie. He brings the perfect amount of kind-hearted warmth and caring, but also just love of life and appreciation for what he has. You really couldn't ask for a better, kind-hearted, jolly Santa Claus voice for this special. That being said, I don't think his voice works all the time in this particular story. Now, if you were to ask me about The Year Without Santa Claus, which I'm probably going to be talking about next week, spoiler alert, but he's perfect in that because he's the old bearded Santa Claus the entire time. But in this movie, you don't see him as the big bearded Santa Claus that we know and love. Here he's a young man, he's got red hair, he's got no beard throughout most of the movie, and when he does have the beard, he's still pretty young. But all the while you're hearing this old man Mickey Rooney voice that does feel like Santa Claus, and it fits in that way, but there are times when it gets really distracting when you notice that this is not the voice of a 20-something young man. I don't know, for me it doesn't always work, but the fact that it just feels like a Santa Claus voice kind of makes me okay with it. And if you're expecting this movie to take place predominantly in the North Pole, you are sorely mistaken, because they don't really get to the North Pole until I think over halfway through the movie, because the majority of this movie takes place in this little town up north somewhere called Sombertown. Well, they have a Burgermeister, Meisterburger, which is probably one of the funniest fake names of all time. And if you even speak or understand a little bit of German, you get that joke and why it's actually pretty clever. But the Burgermeister is this dictatorial, oppressive dude and makes everybody in Sombertown, well, somber because he has outlawed toys. Toys are illegal, immoral, and anybody caught with a toy is going to be placed under arrest and thrown in the dungeon. Yes, that's an exact quote. I just have seen this special so many times as a kid, and it's just in there. But while that's happening, on the other side of the mountains, you have this little community of elves, kind of like the Seven Dwarfs if they were Christmas elves, and all their names rhymed with Kringle because that's their last name. So you got Dingle Kringle, Zingle Kringle, and I don't know, Pringle Kringle. They have this baby dropped off at their doorstep with nothing but the word Claus on the tag, and they adopt him and call him Kris Kringle. And that's why Santa Claus has so many different names. And when Kris becomes a man, he wants to go to the other side of the mountain and deliver the toys that the Kringles made to all these children that are suffering under the Burgermeister. And that's exactly what it does. And the bulk of this movie is just Kris going over to Somber Town, delivering toys, and then the toys getting taken away, and him having to come up with more and more elaborate ways to deliver the toys. And at first it starts off pretty simple. He just walks in the middle of the town and finds a bunch of kids and starts giving out toys, but he does it in the creepiest way possible. And it's this A Kiss a Toy song. I don't know, as time goes by, that song just gets more and more awkward when you have this strange man that comes to town and he has kids sit on his lap. Now, it's already weird, but you know that has to happen because that's the tradition. You sit on Santa's lap, ask what you want. And what's weird, and probably hasn't aged all that well, is that the kids actually give him a kiss when he gives them the toys, and that's the thank you for the toy. And I'm sure in the 70s that was seen as normal. I don't know, this was also the era of Richard Dawson kissing all the female contestants on Family Feud, so I guess it was just a different time back then. But of course, just giving out toys in the middle of the day is gonna raise some suspicion. So the toys get taken away and then he's gotta go at night. So that's why he shows up at night. And then all the people are told to lock their doors. So he can't go in through the front door, so he's gotta go down the chimney. That's how that started. And then they had to figure out a way to hide the toys from being seen when they go in to inspect the houses in the morning to make sure he hadn't visited them. And so that's where the hiding them in stockings tradition started. And that's all fun to see, but what would a Santa Claus origin story be without a Mrs. Claus? And here we have Jessica, the school teacher, who's this very uptight, strict, rule follower school teacher. But in true rom-com fashion, she sees how whimsical and lighthearted Kris is, and she just can't help but fall in love with him and his mission. And I don't know if I ever noticed this before, but the idea of a Mrs. Claus being a school teacher who's all uptight and strict and starting off being really at odds with Santa Claus only to fall in love with him later, that's the plot of the Santa Claus 2 with Tim Allen. And this brings us to the other weird song in this movie that comes kind of right out of nowhere. It's when Jessica's starting to actually fall for Kris, and she gets this weird 70s hippie acid trip sequence with birds and psychedelic watercolors, and for a couple minutes I don't know what's going on. If any of you have like a rational explanation that isn't, oh well, it's just the 70s, is what they did. No, there's plenty of stuff that came out in the 70s that didn't just throw psychedelia at the wall like that. There's gotta be some kind of narrative reason for it, but I can't figure it out. And now I'm realizing I've only talked about the songs that are kind of weird and out of place, and I haven't even mentioned the good songs that are in this special. And there are quite a few. Obviously, you have Santa Claus is Coming to Town, and when it's sung and reprised throughout this special, it's pleasant to hear. Fred Astaire has a great voice. I think a lot of people forget that because he's so well remembered for his dancing. He actually had a pretty good singing voice on top of that. But this special really does have great original songs like we got in Rudolph. And I'd say probably around that same standard of just toe-tapping earworms that just feel like Christmas. But as the special goes along, Kris Kringle becomes more and more of an outlaw to the point of actually growing whiskers to hide his face as a disguise, and that's where we get this, I don't know what to call it, this mid-transition Santa Claus that I never really liked as a guy. I always thought it looked so weird and unnatural, and he only looks like that for like one scene, and the movie quickly skips ahead to when he's older, and they've expanded their toy giving to not just Somber Town anymore. Now they're going all over the world, and they talk about limiting their travels to one night a year, and the night that they chose is the most holy of nights of goodwill and kindness and peace on earth, and you know, all the things that Christmas is, so that's why he chose Christmas. And then the movie ends with another reprise of Santa Claus is Coming to Town. And it's weird calling it a reprise because it's probably the one time in the special where I actually get the full lyrics to the song, beginning to end, all the different verses. And you know, it's fun to see the kids marching along in the town with the parade, and you see Fred Astaire puppet delivering the mail in his little snowmobile. And of course it ends where you see Mickey Rooney, Santa, fully realized. I actually think it looks better, and I would have loved to see more of this version of Santa Claus, this Santa Claus puppet, because that is just a classic Santa Claus look. And for me, of all the Rankin Bass Santa Claus designs that they've gone through over the years, this is my favorite. And wrapping up this video, I feel like you guys would feel cheated if I didn't at least mention the animation. And the animation, while it's still awkward and doesn't always sync up perfectly, you can tell that they really stepped up the quality between this and Rudolph and Little Drummer Boy, with the designs and the articulations and just the sculpture involved in a lot of these character designs are so much more detailed and articulated, and the set design all looks so much better than the Little Drummer Boy, and even I would say an improvement on what they did in Rudolph. But I don't know, I feel like something happened around Frosty and Little Drummer Boy where they're like, okay, we actually have to start putting in real effort and time and money into these specials because people love them, people are sharing them, and we want them to last from generation to generation. We want this thing to have legs, to make character designs that are unique. They don't feel like carbon copies of the same kid everywhere. And for me, that's the thing that I really have come to appreciate about these specials, is the artistry. Stop motion animation is no joke. It is a time-consuming artistic process where you have physical objects in space that you are bringing to life and have complete control over every frame. Why not give these characters such distinct personalities that just looking at their design, you know immediately what they're about? And that's what I think Santa Claus is Coming to Town does better than maybe any of the other specials that I've talked about. And that's pretty much it for Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Santa Claus is Coming to Town? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is Minority Talk, and Merry Christmas.